All right, so there you have it. Straight from the mouths of regular people. There is a fear out there of China and Russia, whether those people know why or not. But if there is indeed a scare orchestrated by the mainstream media, why have they centered on these two countries? And when, if ever, will those attitudes change? Earlier today, we talked with Danny Schechter in our New York studios. He's a filmmaker and blogger for newsdissector.net, and here's his take.
Well, you know, we have adversaries in the world. We're competing all the time with other countries, and the best way to compete with them is basically to try to discredit them with the American people. The American people won't take what they say seriously. It's part of a whole psychological operations, information operations that goes on regularly to try to discredit other critical voices about the United States, particularly in other countries. And what better way to do it than to cast aspersions on their leaders or suggest that they're not telling the truth.
There's, of course, if you want to look at what's going on now, there's this decision by China and Russia not to intervene militarily in Syria. And, you know, if you turn on any number of networks, there have been endless pundits out there talking about why this is bad. But, you know, we should also mention this China-Russia fear goes back to the days of McCarthyism and before. I'm wondering, Danny, do you think that some of this fear has blended together from the two sort of eras, or that there are two distinct generational views against these countries?
Well, you know, fear works. It demobilizes people. It gives them pause. It makes them think again about what their views are, if their personal security or the country's security is by implication being threatened in some way. We are not in a good shape economically. China is doing better than we are. Russia is doing better on the energy front in many cases than we are. So there is a tremendous amount of insecurity in America. And insecurity leads to sort of a certain overzealous attitude to try to assert supremacy, which may not be backed up by the facts. But we live in an age of perception trumping reality. People don't have the context. They don't have the background. They don't really understand what other countries are doing and saying, because there's very little attention paid to it. There's much more attention paid, you know, to various Republican candidates beating up on each other than what actually is happening in the world at large. So it's not surprising that these tactics are used, because they're basically directed at an audience that's really not very aware of the underlying dynamics.
I think it's really interesting. You know, it is. It's perception. And there was a recent poll, I think it was a survey just taken in the last week or so, and a lot of people, more people than not, think that China's economy is actually larger than the U.S.'s. The U.S.'s is still much larger. Of course, China's is growing much faster. Certainly in an election year, I'm sure you and I will start to see a lot more election ads invoking this, you know, China's taking our jobs kind of thing. And of course, Iran is a whole other story for another day. But Danny, I mean, what do you think? Does the so-called free, fearless, and independent press even exist still?
Well, I think, you know, it did, but it's becoming an endangered species in, you know, terms of the American media. That's why so many people are getting their news online and not from regular newspapers or network newscasts. They're listening more to contentious argument than they are to, you know, informed speculation and information. And as a result, the public is being dumbed down. It's not their fault, because that's what they think they know. And, you know, that's what they think they're supposed to know. That's why it's important to have independent media outlets, you know, like RT and others, who are trying to offer other perspectives and other points of view. And without that, you would have a total domination of the media by basically misinformation. That's being challenged today, and there are a lot of people, when asked if they trust the media, they say in large numbers that they don't.
All right, so Danny, I mean, as you say, the public is being dumbed down, and quite frankly, I think for many people, ignorance is bliss. But other than a less informed society, what do you think are going to be some of the, you know, the real impacts, the real negative impacts of having people get the wrong information?
Well, the consequences of all of this, are really quite major. This is what leads to war, people believing, the enemy is about to attack them. Bombs from Iraq are going to go to London within 45 minutes. All of these, claims that were used to mobilize support for a war that turned out to be a total flop and failure. And the same thing in Afghanistan, where, we started a war against Al-Qaeda, ended up in a war against, the Taliban, and the war against often civilians in Afghanistan. No wonder they're not real happy with the United States. This is why I think our challenge as viewers and as citizens is to try to find information sources that we can trust, not to rely on the same sources over and over again, to seek out other types of information and to inform ourselves, because the media is not doing a very good job of informing us.
And that was Danny Schechter, filmmaker and blogger for NewsDissector.net.